Um, Let me introduce Renee. She is a master trainer for YogaFit with over a decade of experience as an instructor and presenter. Renee blends her knowledge in exercise physiology, nutrition, and biomechanical principles with a personal experience to provide valuable information and practical tips for athletic performance, stress management, and metabolic aspects of physical activity. And Renee, I'd love for you to talk to us about your personal experience. I know you have a really cool thing coming up, and I'd love for you to just kind of highlight that real quick before we get into the webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Lizzie. And for everyone out there, thank you for attending. Just as we're doing our intro here, I wanted to give a heads up for those that were at the first session. It'll be much the same, where we're going to talk through some topics, have a little bit of practical application, nothing too intense. But if you do have a yoga strap or something similar to a yoga strap, such as a towel or a belt or anything like that, you might want to go scurry and grab that real quick and just have it nearby for one of the activities that we will be doing here in a little bit. And so prior to starting, I shared with Lizzie, and this would have come up at that first webinar as well, as one of my kind of background with regards to yoga and athletes is myself. I am a competitive athlete for Team USA. So I compete in duathlon, which for those who aren't familiar, is much like triathlon, but instead of swim, bike, run, it's run, bike, run. So it's all the lower body, trash your legs. In a couple hours. And a couple of weeks ago, I competed in nationals, and that was in Irving, Texas, for anyone who's in the Texas area. And the weekend after that, I was in Michigan competing at Powerman, and in 2 weeks, I'll go to compete at the World Championship race in Romania. So putting things together today was really nice, because I just thought to myself, what do I as an athlete, what would be really helpful for me right now through my training, through racing, and pairing some of all those yoga tools and techniques that we have. So with that, I have a PowerPoint that I'll be using, and I've already sent that to Lizzie, and she will distribute to anyone who would like to have a copy of that. So you'll see it pop up on your screen, and we're all Zoom experts these days, so you can like resize it and make me bigger or smaller, or the screen bigger or smaller. So feel free to do that. And as Lizzie said, this is the deeper dive to what we talked about the first time. The first, which is kind of an overview of everything we can do to provide balance to an athlete with regards to the diverse aspects of yoga. And we talked through some of the physical aspects, we talked through some breath and all that. And then today we're gonna just take that a little bit deeper and further. And one thing I want to start with is just the reminder that yoga offers so much for everybody, including athletes. And we have right here in this chart, looks like a little, Trivial Pursuit pie chart, the 5 components of fitness. And the 5 components of fitness are the attributes that a person needs to have to be able to perform optimally. And that pie chart we talked about in the first webinar was that most athletes, it's imbalanced, where they will have a predominance to a couple of those, 1 or 2 or 3, and not so much on the others. So for someone like myself, spend a lot of time doing cardio and spend a lot of time with that component, as well as the strength and just the lower body. So for me to create balance, I'd want to focus a little bit more on my flexibility, maybe some upper body strength training. Someone who is maybe the yoga instructor that teaches 3 classes a day, most days a week, maybe theirs is a little bit more geared towards the flexibility standpoint. Maybe they aren't getting much of the cardio, or someone who does a lot of weight training. So we can look at that. How can we create balance all together with that? And one aspect that we're going to particularly focus on today is the flexibility component, because of the cumulative injury cycle and muscle imbalances. And we oftentimes think of flexibility as just, what most people think of yoga as static stretching. But there's a lot more to that. So that's one of the big aspects we'll talk about today. And with that, jumping into the cumulative injury cycle, we talked a little bit about this on the first one too. So I wanted to review that, because that gives us the mind frame about why we're talking about what we are and why we're going to do what we do. And that cumulative injury cycle is how injuries arise. And injuries sometimes could just be accidental, like, oh, I tripped and fell and, sprained my ankle, or I pulled a muscle. But Other times it's from overtraining, that repetitive motion that any physical activity will have. And we can see as we go around this circle here, it starts with tissue trauma, and we see the word trauma, and I think all of us are like, trauma, bad, kind of like that acute traumatic injury. But tissue trauma is also just the load and stress and wear that's on the body, such as yesterday, I did a trail run followed by a road bike. And so my muscles had experienced some trauma just from that load I had put on them. So that's completely normal. That happens. Don't worry about that. And then we go to inflammation. And again, we see the word inflammation. We're like, oh, bad. We put the word chronic in front of it. Yes. But inflammation is our body's natural healing mechanism. So when we do that workout, or athlete does that workout, our bodies are working to heal. And that's going to provide us to become more strong in those muscle groups. So that's fine. And then we get to muscle spasm, and you're like, oh, that sounds awful, because I remember the last time I had a muscle spasm. But that's where the area, the muscle fibers are tightening up in order to promote that healing process. And so again, that's normal. That's going to happen. That's when you have a little bit of that muscle soreness, the DOMS, the delayed onset muscle soreness. So again, that's part of normal training. And if we were to stay on this left side of the circle and just like, oh, hey, I recovered, and then I'm going to go do my workout again, I'm all nice and recovered, and just kind of keep going around, that would be great. It'd be like a linear, like everything is awesome. But that's not really what happens, because again, athletes, they don't understand the word rest. I also was told yesterday by my massage therapist, I needed to know what the word was. I can't remember what it was, another R word, but it was like recovery. Relaxation, I think is what he said. So we don't know those words, and we just keep doing those the exercise, right? The training. So what happens is our body starts to form knots in the muscle, or adhesions in the fascia. And so that is where we have, if we ever foam rolled, we found plenty of those, right? So when we have that repetitive motion, what happens is the fascia starts to shorten, and it, instead of being movable and glidable, it starts to be all knotted up like this. And what that does is causes us to not be able to move our bodies optimally. So you can think of it as like when you woke up in the morning, you try to stretch, and you're like, ooh, things are a little tight, and I'm not as mobile as I used to be prior to doing that workout. And that is where we get this altered neuromuscular control, where our brain says, body, let's go do this. And the body's like, but I can't do it the way you want me to, but I'm going to do it some optimal way. And so we will find a way to do it. And that's where you can see if someone, for a runner, their stride is shortened, or there's not something optimally happening at the hip because there's all that tightness there. And that further leads to muscle imbalances. And then you go around this circle enough times, and then one of those injuries where you have like a muscle pull or anything like that is because of being in that cycle. So what we can do with our athletes is focus on muscle imbalances and working on correcting that the best way possible. We talked a little bit about muscle imbalances in athletes, and this is, we say athletes, and I use that word, and it's like, we think elite athletes, and we can also just think someone who uses our body for an activity with purpose on a regular basis. So it doesn't have to be elite. All of us are athletes if there's something we do on a normal basis with our body. So if you have a body, you are an athlete. You heard it from me. And so what we have is patterns of overactive and underactive muscles. So you can think tight and weak muscles that are opposing each other. And we have that in the upper body at the shoulder area, and we have that in the lower body at the hip area. And again, this is everybody, everyday life. And then it's even more so in specific sports we can tie them to. So we'll start with the hips, because we will all like gravitate towards this right away, where, and I wish I could do like a poll function, like say, who has tight hips? We would all raise our hands. So I guess there's no need to do that. So we have tight hip flexors. And again, that happens for any sort of sport or activity. We're using the lower body and hip flexion motion. So running, cycling, anything that is running like sport, such as soccer. And then it also is things where you're in that constant hip flexion. So sitting at your desk and working. And what that causes the tightness in the hip flexors, and we know that's the psoas. We have other hip flexor muscles as well, but the psoas is a primary one there. And then what that's going to do is pull the pelvis a little bit forward. And what that's going to do is create tightness in the low back and the erector spinae. And so I'm sure we've all felt that before. And then those are the kind of tight ones, and the opposing ones that are weak would be your abs and your glutes. So that's the first pattern of muscles there. And then we can all think to ourselves, yep, that I can gravitate, I can understand what that's like. And the other one is at the upper body and the shoulders. And again, the same thing, where we have that forward rounded posture. So any sort of sport or activity, you can think of where they're hunched over in the position, such as like volleyball, tennis, we have swimming, we have sitting at our desk, typing on the computer. So everyone can sit a little straighter right now. And what we again have is a weak mid upper back. And then we're going to have tightness in the front, in the anterior deltoids and the pectorals. And then that's going to create tightness in the neck here, in the upper part of the neck. So again, the same concept here. So we can think to ourselves, yes, it'd be great if I just stretched. But we know that that's not the most effective way for athletes, especially with regards to the muscle fibers and being able to get the body optimally ready for the activity. Because I always joke too, is that, I could sit here and stretch, but then I'm just going to undo it and I just go back out and do a bike ride. So we can think of how can I get my body back into the proper alignment and then work on strengthening the proper muscles. So one of the most effective techniques for that is utilizing an advanced stretching technique called Proprioceptive Neuromuscular Facilitation, also called PNF stretching. You may have heard of it, also called facilitated stretching. And I included a slide here that just talks about all the research behind, and you feel free to, I'm not gonna read it to you, but feel free to read, and you want to, especially the bold parts about how much more effective this is for athletes than just doing standard static stretching. And this is, there's recent research, and this goes all the way back into the 80s where there was research being published. It's actually a technique that was back from the 1940s. So it's something that's been around for a very long time. And for something that is so well known to be beneficial, it is not used very much. And in my opinion, it's because we don't know how to do it. And we don't know how to do it with more muscle groups. So this is going to be the first activity, the one that we needed the strap for. So first, we'll just talk through some science, and then we're going to give ourselves a really good stretch on our bodies. So with it, we have to understand what we're doing, why we're doing. So if there's anyone out there that loves anatomy as much as I am, we are like kindred souls here, because I love anatomy and understanding and being able to communicate why we do and how we get the benefits. And that's what we'll talk through for a second. And first is understanding proprioceptors in our body and how they give feedback on what's happening. Specifically in our muscles, we have two of them called the muscle spindles and the GTO, Golgi tendon organs. And I like to describe them like they have little personalities. Helps us understand how they are different and what they do. And with the muscle spindles, they are located in the belly of the muscle right here in the center. And it is in essence our stretch reflex. And so if you think to yourself, have you ever gone into a really deep stretch and then you're like, whoa, we need to come back out of that? So for some people that's pigeon, some people that's lizard. It could be any number of things where your body's like, I just kind of wasn't ready to go that deep into that pose. And we felt our bodies tighten up against it. And so what the muscle spindles do is they detect changes in length and the speed and change in length. And if they're stimulated by one of those two things, the sensory neurons go through the spinal cord to the motor neurons and say, contract those muscle fibers. So basically it's trying to protect your muscle from overstretching or tearing. They don't know you're just like trying to do yoga and you just went too deep, too fast. Other times we may have felt this is if you've ever, if you like slipped on ice or like a wet floor and you just felt like your muscles tighten up, or maybe you tripped and stumbled and you felt that same thing, like, whoa, that was close call. You could feel those muscle fibers tightening. And then on the other hand, and I like to say the muscle spindles are very reactionary in nature. They're like, let's protect. And then the GTO, they are on the ends of the muscle at the muscle tendon junction. It's in its name right there to help you remember that. And what they do is detect change in pressure. And it is working as opposite to the muscle spindles. So with this, it's going to send an inhibitory impulse when it is stimulated by no change in pressure. So if there's something that's constant, that's unchanging, like there's load in the muscle, will cause it to create relaxation and then slack in the muscle. Again, this is like a protective aspect, and it's going to counter the muscle spindles. So I give them little personalities, like the muscle spindles are like Chicken Little, like, oh no, this guy's falling, the muscle's tearing. And the Golgi tendon organ's like, no, she's just stretching. So what we can do is utilize this knowledge, this science about what's happening in our bodies to kind of speed up the ability to create length in the muscle. Like instead of just sitting and holding for a long period of time, what I can do is use PNF stretching, which takes a very short amount of time, and get a lot of benefit out of it. Particularly for athletes, research has shown that when you are holding static stretches for a long period of time, ideally for athletes to be 30 seconds to a minute, but we're talking like 2 minutes or more. So think more of like a yin yoga type of situation, that is going to cause a weakening of the muscle fibers. So someone like me who may have several workouts stacked throughout the day or key workouts, I wouldn't want to create an environment where there's going to be weakening of the muscle fibers because it's going to increase my chance of injury. So this is also a very safe way to keep athletes safe and giving them the ability to create length in the muscle. So the steps of it are listed here. Basically, we want to go into the stretch, go into the full position of the body, full range of motion. And then what we're going to do is we are going to create pressure in the muscle. Remember, GTOs want pressure to be stimulated. And it's not about how much pressure, just it's consistent. So we're just going to gently contract the muscle. And on a scale of like 1 to 10, it's only like a 2 or 3. Just like think of any sort of dynamic tension. Like if you're doing a warrior 2 and you're holding your arms out with dynamic tension, that kind of contraction of the muscle. And then we're going to hold that for about 2 to 3 breaths, which is about 5 to 10 seconds. Doesn't take very long. Then we're going to relax the muscle. And then we're going to use the concept of reciprocal inhibition, which is contracting the opposite muscle to go deeper. So in this case, we can think of back in front of the body. So if you're doing your hamstring, you're going to contract your quad, and you're going to do that 2 to 3 times. So if you do a little bit of math, you're like, oh, okay, well, 5 to 10 seconds, 2 to 3 times. That's like 30 seconds, maybe 45 if I just want to hold and stretch a little bit longer. One of the most common ones that most people are introduced to is using the hamstring and with a strap. And that'll be the first one we do just because it helps us to connect to something we know. And again, what you'll want to do is go into your full range of motion. You're going to contract the hamstring and the strap is going to resist you in that case. And then when you relax, you're going to contract the quad. And what you'll find is the leg will transition deeper. One key thing to remember about this is that the more you, I don't know how to say it, like the more you need, the more you could get out of it. So someone who has their legs starting down at this position, which is probably where I'll be today, has the opportunity, not that it will actually happen, but you have the ability to potentially get a lot more than if someone has their leg all the way over here off, like past their head, like they're at their full range of motion. So I'm going to lead us through a number of different ones to target some of those common muscle imbalances in athletes, just so we can see and feel for ourselves and also have a bunch of ideas. In my day job is I teach at NC State University, exercise science to college kids. So I love resources and giving as many resources as possible. So for those of you that want to review and get more stuff, there's a link to a video there that does a very brief overview and gives more options. And then for that, we're going to turn off screen share here for a minute, and then we will do some stretching. So with that, like I said, if you have a strap, feel free to grab it. And I'm going to make that screen big. I'm going to slide myself back to my yoga mat. So again, the key thing here is that we want to contract the muscle. That's where you can use your anatomy knowledge. And then just think about, again, it being like a consistent amount. So the first one, like I said, is we're going to do a hamstring stretch just because it's something that everybody knows and we all could probably benefit from that in general. So if you are joining me, feel free to come onto your back. And then with your strap, placing your right foot into the strap. And we're going to keep the left knee bent. Or if you like, you can take that straight onto the mat. And as we are here in this position, first come to your full range of motion. This is my full range of motion, so whether yours is more or less than me, what you'll want to do is take a soft knee bend just to protect the knee joint. And then with the hamstring, what we have to think of is how do I contract the hamstring is the hamstring works at the knee and the hamstring works at the hip. So it's almost like I'm trying to drive the heel towards the ground to the mat. So gentle contraction of the leg. You can put your hand there and feel it a little bit. And again, just on a scale of 1 to 10, like a 2 or 3. And then now we can relax. And then you can do 2 things. You can use a strap to go deeper, or you can contract the quad. And then again, we want to engage the hamstring, contract, contract, contract. And then as we relax, a little bit deeper. And always staying where it's comfortable, and the last time we'll contract. And relax. Then we can switch to the other side. I'm keeping this more to like the 5-second shorter end just because we don't have a ton of time. So again, nice little knee bend here, softening the knee, contract the hamstring. And what's nice too is we can compare the two sides, almost like where the first side ended and where the second side starts. And then we can relax and go a little deeper and contract, contract. So you should feel like the leg's not moving because again, the strap is creating that resistance. And then relax. I hope you all are like, this is exactly what I needed today. Just lay down on the floor and work on my hamstrings. And then relax. All right. So that was the first one, just to be able to get us into the mind frame of what it is. And that is the one, if you've done PNF before, that's probably what you've done. A lot of people also use a door frame where you can put your foot against door frame if you don't have a strap. Now, like I said, I wanted to focus on the ones that would target some of those muscle imbalances we referenced with the upper and lower cross syndrome. So first one, if we want to come standing, we talked about tight hip flexors, right? So we had our psoas, but basically I call your second in command hip flexor is your quad. And yoga, there aren't too many poses that stretch the quads. There's plenty that stretch the hamstrings. And so those get really tight, especially when we sit and any sort of lower body sport and activity. So we're gonna do a modified dancer. So it's basically a quad stretch. If you have a wall or anything nearby, that's perfect. And then again, what the quad does is it does this and it does that. So it works on the hip, it works on the knee. So that's the kind of thing we're gonna think about. We're gonna think about pulling the hip up and we're thinking about kicking the foot down, and that's gonna help us contract the quad. So as we're here holding, we're gonna contract, contract, contract. And then you can relax. And again, what you can do is, since you have your hand, is you can just pull your heel a little closer towards your glutes, engage your hamstrings on the other side. And then we'll do it again. And relax. And one more time. And pulling deeper into the stretch. All right. We're doing the other side. Then first start, and again, you can compare how did the second side end up compared to the first side. Mine went really far. That was very effective for me. I hope it was for you too. So again, we're contracting the quad. Making sure to keep everything stable, core engaged, knee soft. Always those good things we think about. And then relax. And then contract the quad. And relax. And one more time. And relax. All right. Now traveling on through the body. Remember, we talked about the two parts, the hips here, that we also then have tightness in the back. So how about we work on some of that as well? And we're going to do that through your choice of hand to big toe or gorilla pose. So it's again, yogi toe grip or hands underneath your feet. And if you are tight like me, just super deep bend of the knees to make sure that you're taking care of your spine. So we'll come down into that fold position, whether you want to slide your hands underneath or you want to do the yogi toe grip. And so again, what we're going to do is we're going to think about lifting up, engaging the erector spinae, and then we will be able to use our arms to pull us deeper into the pose. Make sure to keep those knees bent and hinged at the hips. So as we find our hand position, head in line with the spine, let's think about lifting upward, engaging those back muscles. Almost like we're kind of coming into an extension, like we would want to almost come into a half lift monkey pose. and then release and see if we can come down deeper. What's nice is this will also get everything else on your posterior chain, which we will talk about here momentarily. And then lift up. And deepen the stretch. And one more time. And release. We can slowly come back up to tall. Now, to get back into the lower body, we're going to target some hips, and we're going to do the glutes and the external rotators, which the most famous of the external rotators is your piriformis. So we'll work on those aspects there. We're going to do it in pigeon pose. If you have any sort of knee issue that prohibits you from being comfortable and appropriately aligned in pigeon, feel free to do it in seated or supine. I'm going to do the prone version, but again, do what's best for you and your body today. So we can come into a forward fold and just make our way into a downward facing dog. And from here, what we're going to do is take and lift our right leg to the sky. And that's going to engage our glute to be able to pull it underneath and through into that pigeon pose. So before we flop down, or lower down, usually people just flop into it. We're going to sit here and just settle and make sure our weight is balanced. And remember what your glutes do. Your glutes, they're your glorious glutes. They do so many different things. But your glute max does hip extension, external rotation. Your side glutes, mid and medius, work a little bit more on that abduction. And then your piriformis does the external rotation. So when their leg is underneath you, what you have to do, and I'm going to turn a little bit forward for this, is almost think about spiraling, tucking your hip underneath and pushing it forward. And that's going to allow you to engage your glute. Some people find they're like, I can't engage just one, I have to do them both. And if that's you, that's totally fine. Just engage in both. Just know that one side's going to get the benefit. And then when we go into the deepening of the pose, what you can either do is kind of like, massage your way in or start to extend yourself forward. So now that we're in our position and our hips are accustomed to the stretch, let's engage that right glute, whether you stay uplifted or you're down. I'm going to stay uplifted so my voice can transfer out to you. And then we can relax. And again, what you can do is a little maybe rock. Maybe you start to extend yourself a little bit more forward down on the mat. And then again, right glute contracts. If your left has to as well, that's totally fine. And relax. And one more time, contract and hold. And relax. And again, you should be like trying to stretch yourself out, get your chest closer down to the ground. As we rise ourselves back up and make our way into downward facing dog. Then you can just compare right hip to left hip and be like, ooh, left hip's a little jealous, so we'll lift that left leg up. Bring underneath and through. And just first, this is one of those that big stretches that would stimulate the muscle spindles, as in like, whoa. So we want to ease our way into it. And then again, whether you stay uplifted or come down a little bit, we'll engage the left glute. And relax. And if we want to go deeper, we can lengthen our torso forward and outward, chest down to the ground, engage the left glute.
Renee, a question came in from Pat. He asks, which muscle do you contract and release in pigeon pose?
Right here, the glute and your external rotators. So think of doing external rotation and getting the hip underneath. And that's a great question. And that should be our last time, so we can slowly lift back up. And then releasing down. For this one, I'm going to give us an option on what would be best for you. So it's like choose your own adventure. We have the adductors. So there's people who have really tight adductors and they're kind of up here. And then there's people who are really open, extra rotated. And you're like, I don't really have much more to give here. So depending on where you are, if you want the adductors, what you would do is butterfly pose, and you would draw your knees inward towards the elbows, and then you can like lean forward to stretch more. So that's option number one. Option number two is calves. And with calves, you can do two things depending on how much work you want to do. You can use your strap on the bottom of your feet. And what you're going to do is press forward into the strap and then use the strap to pull back. If you don't mind a little bit more upper body strengthening and you have a lot of tightness in your calves, then down dog is another option where you can come here into down dog, lift up, and then you can press those heels down. So that's your choose your own adventure. And again, whether you want to do the adductors or the calves. And I'm going to cue you through and take a look at the chat to see if there's any other good questions. So as you find your choice, calves or adductors, and you can contract and hold. And release. And then contract and hold. And release. And last time, contract and hold. And release. Great, and it looks like there's lots of comments of just in general that have already been answered. So we're good to go. So hopefully you feel good with that. And then again, most people just focus on the hamstring. It is arguably easy and we could all benefit from it, but there's so many other different ways. And those are the ones that I wanted to take time to talk through today. That video link that's in the PowerPoint that Lizzie will send out, you can click on that, and there's a whole bunch of other ones for working with the upper body. So you'll have that as a little takeaway. The next thing I wanted to talk about is something I mentioned here just a moment ago. And when we were doing the PNF for the upper back, and I mentioned posterior chain, I said, depending on what's happening in your body, you may be feeling it other places like your glutes and your hamstrings, maybe even down to your calves. And one thing we tend to think about with yoga is very isolated. Like I have tight hips, I need to stretch my hip flexor. I have a tight back, I need to stretch my back. But with our body, it's much more complex than that. And it comes down to that everything is interconnected in the body. And then oftentimes where we think we have a problem, it's not necessarily always originating from there, but it could stem from something else in our body, or there could be longer term impacts because all of our muscles are surrounded in fascia, which is the connective tissue, right? And then muscle groups are surrounded in fascia, and then muscles are connected to each other via fascia. And so when we are doing repetitive movement, again, athletes do repetitive movement, humans do repetitive movement, is that we can create tightness, adhesions in those meridian lines or those anatomy trains. So what I want us to take a moment to think about in our heads is that with athletes, what we have the opportunity to do is not just pick a pose, but pick the best pose depending on the athlete and the sport and what's happening in their body. When we're teaching to a general class, general population, maybe it's our regular Tuesday night class, yeah, we want to have some similarity. Yeah, we want to have some variety. And you're like, well, I haven't done sun pose in a while. I'm going to do sun pose today. And I'm going to build into this other thing that we're working on. But with athletes, their training is very specific. Like if you looked at my training plan, you'd be like, you do a lot of the very same things. So I can also think of my yoga as that same way and create yoga snacks, like little bite-sized pieces of things that are like, these are the top 5 poses that would benefit me the most if I did this on a regular basis, and make that part of the training plan, the training continuum. And again, thinking about how we can choose the optimal pose for that. So what I talk about in trainings is where we talk about, and I'm going to go back to that slide here, and the muscle imbalances. And we say, you know, again, a runner cyclist over here, and tight hip flexors, hello, that's me. And so I challenge my trainees and I say to them, I was like, all right, so I have tight hips, tight hip flexors, tightness in the low back, weakness in the abs, weakness in the glutes. What is something I can do to strengthen my glutes? Guaranteed, I think it's happened every single training, which is a lot of them. They say chair pose. And I say, good choice, but what about chair pose? And then they think about it. And I was like, what are my hips doing? And they're like, oh, you're in hip flexion. I was like, so it's not real, it's a good choice. It's not really solving my problem though, because I'm strengthening it, yes, but I'm still in a hip flexion position. So then I encourage them to think a little bit more, like, well, what else? Like, what would be something that's better? And so it takes them a while to get there, but then we come up with, let's do a bridge pose, let's do an incline plank or reverse plank, depending on what you call it. Those things where I can be in a neutral hip position and be strengthening my glutes. That would help me, especially if I can work on lengthening the hip flexor while strengthening glute at the same time. When we look at the upper crossed syndrome, the upper body, so it's like, oh, okay, I have tightness in the front of my body. What can I do? What everyone says, chest expansion. I was like, yeah, well, I mean, what's something better? What's something where I can create more strengthening in the back while also lengthening the front? So then we come up with, maybe do cactus arms. Maybe we're gonna do a locust, something like that, versus just bringing the hands behind. Let's create a little bit more activation to the upper back. So those are some things that we talk through in trainings, and think again, what are the optimal ideal poses based on the movement? And that's where these meridians come in handy, because you can look at the line of the muscles and how they are tied together. And there's plenty of videos on this, and I'm more than happy to also share some resources. And we can say, well, what are the ways that I can most stretch out those lines? So in trainings, what I do, and if you're like fun, if your idea of fun is like anatomy, we should be friends, but also you should do this taping exercise where tape the muscle groups. And then what I do is I say, like, well, what's the way I can break the tape? I want the tape, you know, if this is the line that goes from here to here, I don't want to just break it a little bit. I want this thing to like completely break open, because that means I'm lengthening along the whole line. So we can also visualize too, that when we're talking about, say, the superficial back line here, which is coming down the whole back of the body, what's the best way to break that tape? What is the most position I can get to lengthen that line? Same thing with the superficial front line. Where is the most movement I can create in the body? And that's going to help us too when we think about athletes. So if this kind of stuff interests you, we should have another webinar and talk more. But you could also sign up for the athletes training, because we spend a whole afternoon looking through, talking through, looking sport specific, and say, okay, so how is it different from a golfer than it is from a swimmer? And it's can even be non-traditional. We talk about, like, say someone is a hiker, or rock climber, or jiu-jitsu, or maybe someone's just a yoga instructor. Like, what are all the different common movement patterns, and where are the best poses that we can do for those kind of movement patterns? Another really great thing that we can do to help our athletes, and I love it too when talking to people, and they always ask me the question, how often do you do yoga? And I'm like, every day. And they're like, you do yoga every day? Or if it's a rest day, I'm like, I'm just going to do some yoga today. I'm like, it doesn't have to be physical. There's a whole lot of yoga that is not physical. 8 limbs of yoga. It's only one of the limbs. And a lot of what I work on personally is breath. And we talked about that at the first webinar, and also visualization. And that's a very powerful thing that we can do as yoga instructors to help athletes, and even ourselves. And with that, with my sport, duathlon, same with triathlon, is that you have like the fourth discipline, which is your transitions. And so for me, you run and then you go into the transition zone and you have to put on your helmet, grab your bike, grab your shoes, do whatever else, leave transition. And so that segment is time of the race. Go ride your bike, and then you have to go back into transition. And every single time, I'm always like either 1 or 2 top overall on the transitions. And constantly people ask me, like, do you practice it all the time? I was like, not physically, mentally, I practice it. Yes. The whole race I'm mentally practicing, so that when I go to transition, I joke sometimes too. I'm like, are people like taking selfies and eating cheeseburgers in there? I don't know why you were in there for 2 minutes and I was only in there for 21 seconds. Like, what were you doing? And it's because you can create a lot of mental through the visualization in your body. It's like dress rehearsal. Your body just knows what to do. You don't have to think. You're not confused. You're just like, I'm just doing what I know I need to do, and my body is ready to do it. So it's this mental training is just as powerful as physical training. So as instructors, what we can do is help them talk through that and manage what their nervous system is doing. So if you go to any athlete and you say, well, talk through the race, or talk through, say they're, basketball, like talk through what's going to happen when you have your free throw. If it's a tennis player, talk through how you're going to do your serve. Inevitably, every single of them would be like feeling anxiety like they feel in the moment. It's like, well, we can retrain. You can just talk me through. I can work with you with breathing techniques, diaphragmatic breath, any of the other advanced techniques we know or familiar with, and get them to come to the place where it's like, I'm mentally practicing. So then again, I'm just following through with that. I don't need to think about anything. And it's like, I've been doing this forever and I've never once done it. So for me in transition, it's funny because you'll see people like running all over the place, like practicing the running. I was like, no, I just need to know where my spot is. What am I going to see on the way? I'm the 3rd row and then I'm 4th from the end. Okay, I know where my bike is. I can close my eyes. I can see my bike on the rack. Cool. I know where my shoes are. I know where my helmet is. And I can walk through and say, I'm going to take off my run shoes, put on my bike helmet, clip it, grab my bike and run. And I can visualize myself running all the way out the other end of transition, so that when the time comes for me to do it, I just do what I already know to do. So that's something really beneficial we can do with our athletes, getting them mentally prepared and not just physically prepared. And then one additional resource I wanted to talk about, and then we'll get into our last topic, is being able to go back to those 5 components of fitness. And I'll pull that back up so we can look at it. And so we had this everything here, right? Everything to make us a balanced athlete. And then you're only as strong as your weakest link. So if anything is not receiving adequate attention, it's going to detract from the others. So we have obviously our cardio, which we can get largely in our yoga practice by sun salutations or just how we sequence the class. And any athlete probably has their own cardio component. Muscular strength, muscular endurance. We have our flexibility we talked about, and body composition is, fat to non-fat mass. So it's positively impacted by all of those, and then add in nutrition. And so with athletes, they always think, if they're like me, they're like, oh, flexibility. And I always joke too, I'm always like, I need to stretch more. And everyone's just like, but you're a yoga instructor. I was like, but I need to do more of it too, to balance everything out. And because there's only so much time, is that what we can do with our athletes is get them to think that they can pair other things into their yoga practice. They can make it more or less cardio, more or less strength. And I can say to myself, I'm a lower body athlete. Maybe I want to incorporate some weights. And therefore, I'm doing my upper body strength training while I'm doing my lower body flexibility training. That would be a very efficient use of my time. And so you may have done like a yoga sculpt type class before, and it's just a way to add intensity. It's going to add strength. It's going to add more of a cardio aspect as well. It's going to give a mental challenge. So for those athletes that are like, I need to feel like I'm doing something, and just stretching doesn't really feel like I'm doing something, this gives them the mental focus aspect. It's going to challenge us in different ways in terms of, especially if we do yoga often, if you add in weight, all of a sudden your distribution of balance is different. So there's a different stability aspect to it. Key recommendations, just use light weights. Doesn't that need to be the same weight that you would use in, the gym? regular strength training. Likelihood is you'll do more repetitions. And one also key thing I always like to mention is shoulders. Yoga's already shoulder focused when you have down dog and chaturangas and, extending your arms in your standing postures. You just want to be mindful of not having too much overload on the shoulders. So going much lighter for those as well. So with that, you can start from the basic, just add in basic upper body strength training exercises to the standing postures, and you can get much more complex from there. So again, I've included some resources for you, some little videos, workout with Renee, and list some YogaFit trainings that if you want to learn a little bit more on how to build and sequence more advanced yoga sculpt classes. And then the last thing I wanted to chat about is back to this cumulative injury cycle. And I mentioned here this altered neuromuscular control. Brain tells the body to do something, and the body's like, well, we're going to do the best we can given today's body. And with athletes, that's if, again, everything's not in balance, and you're going to find a way to create that movement pattern, and that can lead to further injuries. And with that, you can look at someone and they can look like they have, great posture, but once you see their body moves, it all breaks down. And one thing we talk about in our injury prevention and recovery training is being able to look at functional movement. And this is a really important aspect that we can include one-on-one with participants as well as with a whole class, just by surveying with our eyes. And what we talk about is what's called a functional movement screen, which is 7 different movement screens looking at functional movement, either whole body or isolated to a specific part of the body, and seeing if they have adequate strength and stability and range of motion to perform that movement pattern. And I'm going to go over here first. It says like, well, what is the objective? We're not trying for perfection. And that's the first thing I tell your athletes, you're not going to score 100. This isn't a graded thing. It's not like no A+ is for you. We just want to look for dysfunction, because once you find where in the body movement is breaking down, you can then adequately strengthen and lengthen the necessary muscles. So we have, 3 is like you're able to do it. 2 is you're able to do it, but like you might have 1 or 2 things wrong. Like that's pretty good, but we have some work to do. 1 is like, I say, like you're a hot mess. Like, let's just I don't even know where to get started with what was going on there. And 0 is pain. So what you're trying to do is stay above a 1. So, and it's not about being able to like force your body and manipulate and like, I'm going to try to do this. What it is trying to say like, well, what is my body doing naturally? Let me identify it. Let me find out what muscles are involved, and then let's work to correct it. And with those to go through, and again, we can chat more about this in our time or see you in injury prevention and recovery training, is the movements, when you look at them, are also movements that are very similar to yoga poses. So we have a deep squat, that's like chair pose. We have this, what's called hurdle step. And that's kind of like prep for any sort of single leg balance, such as single leg standing hand to toe, or maybe you're getting ready to go into tree pose anytime you're standing on that one leg, right? Or maybe you're just doing a knee lift, preparing to flow to warrior 3. And then we have this inline lunge. I mean, the name says it's a lunge. And then shoulder mobility. And if you see that, that kind of looks like, cow face arms. Then we have a active straight leg raise, which is like a hamstring stretch. We have a trunk stability push-up, which is very similar to a push-up, has it in its name. And rotary stability, you can look at this, and this looks very much like spinal balance. And so what we talk about in that training is being able to look individually, like I could take someone through this assessment and assess them, or I can just have them go into these yoga poses in class and assess the group. So what we talk through is what to look for, what movement patterns are optimal, what would be signs of dysfunction. And then we look at those and say, okay, well, if this is the dysfunction, where is it breaking down? Again, what do I need to strengthen? What do I need to lengthen? And have like a plan of attack. So when I say that, again, every athlete can have a yoga snack. Like this is what right now for this next 1 month or 2 months of training, this is what we're working on. This is what I want you to do once or twice a week. And then, you know, maybe they're doing other stuff on top of that, but they have their little thing they're doing. That's going to help. It's another way that we can work with athletes on, again, individual or a larger scale to help them get that optimal performance. Also, it's helpful for yourself, because what we do in training is we like use ourselves as examples. So then we all walk away with our own little yoga snack to improve our functional movement as well. So I know we're at the end of the time, and somehow I always have way too much to talk about and not enough time. So as a reminder of the trainings that we have as part of the 100-hour athletes program, some of them are part of the 200 hours. So level 1, anatomy 1. Then we have some that are more specific to athletes in general. So YogaFit for personal trainers is a 1-day, yoga back, yoga for a healthy back. We all could use that. And then the 2 that I've really been mentioning a lot is the yoga for athletes and the injury prevention and recovery. So if you're interested in that YogaFit website, and I feel like there is, there we go. Lizzie says there's a special 20% off. And then I see Pat asked there, the idea of small weights with senior classroom mobility and strength. Yes, that would be perfect. And you would use just the same way. And then feel free to drop any other questions in the chat.
Thank you, Renee. That has been amazing. Yes, if you guys have questions in the last few minutes, we are live here. Feel free to answer, or actually, feel free to put them in the chat and we will answer them. But I was watching the chat the whole time, and a lot of people were just sharing their own tips and tricks. Like Nikki said, 100% agree with the sports visualization. That is a hard word to say sometimes. My previous coach used to tell us to go to the movies in our heads before our games. So that's a really fun little trick to use. And I'm just reading the chat.
And I just put my email in the chat, Renee Harrington at hotmail.com. So just first name, last name at Hotmail. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to me individually. And Tina asked about foam rolling fascia. Yes. And usually people ask me, how often should I do it? And I say, yes. Like we all, it's more of like, get to the point of maintenance. I feel like a lot of that type of stuff, people get to the point of like, oh, I need to do it. If you're getting to the point where you need to do it, it means you need to do it more often. And it's something where you can just do 5 minutes of, and just like spot target the part that really needs it in your body that day. So definitely foam rolling. I usually have my foam roller in the corner over there. I moved it because I wanted to clean up for you guys.
Another question that came in, Renee, was about CEUs. So personally, beYogi, we cannot be Yoga Alliance certified. So we usually kind of just let the teacher, but we don't require teachers to be Yoga Alliance certified or anything like that. So Renee, if you are certified.
We give the CECs in the trainings. I don't believe they are the webinars, no.
Yes.
And okay. In terms of the foam rolling, we cover foam rolling in the athletes training.
Awesome. Well, I think we covered majority of questions. Thank you again, Renee, for joining us. Thank you to all the attendees who spent an hour with us. Remember, we will be sending this recording, our previous webinar, and also the PowerPoint in the email that will be sent out tomorrow. And that'll be coming from myself, Lizzie at beYogi.com. In addition, I just wanted to remind everyone that there is an offer going on with YogaFit, 20% off with code. We'll add this into the email with code B2022. This takes 20% off all trainings in the YogaFit for Athletes program, 100 hours. So definitely take advantage. And again, Renee, thank you so much.